Two men were taunting the royal guard, filming him, testing him, trying to make him break. A handful of tourists watched from behind the ropes. Security stayed back, following protocol. Then they crossed the line. That's when a 10-year-old girl stepped forward from the royal viewing area. It wasn't just any child. It was Princess Charlotte. She said 8 words and made grown men feel smaller than shadows. And when one of them invaded the ceremonial space, the guard finally moved. But before we show you how centuries of discipline shattered in a single moment, make sure you're subscribed to our channel, Crown Guard, and drop a comment below telling us where in the world you're watching from. Now, let's get into it. The spring air outside St. James's Palace had that strange London quality where history seemed to hover just above the cobblestones. This wasn't Buckingham with its towering gates and swarming crowds of selfie takers. This was older, quieter, more formal. A corner of royal tradition that had aged gracefully in the shadow of grander stages. Only a dozen tourists lingered behind the rope barriers, most having stumbled upon the scene by accident. Their guidebooks had pointed them toward the main attractions, but they'd taken a wrong turn and found themselves facing scarlet doors and honey-colored stone, now catching the pale morning sunlight like a postcard that hadn't been printed yet. Behind a modest partition that most visitors never noticed stood Princess Charlotte of Wales. Her posture was unusually composed for someone who'd only been alive for 10 years. A navy wool coat buttoned precisely to the collar, hair parted down the middle and woven into a practical braid. Her shoes, polished but not flashy, stood exactly together. If you didn't know better, you might assume she was just another well-dressed schoolgirl on a formal outing. But she wasn't. This was her first ceremony without parents hovering nearby or brothers creating distractions. No George explaining regimental history, no Louis fidgeting beside her. This was different. A quiet test run designed to teach her what it meant to observe without intervening. Watch, listen, learn. That was the assignment. She didn't fidget, didn't ask questions. She absorbed everything with the kind of focused attention that sometimes unsettled adults who weren't used to being studied so carefully. Teachers at Lamuk said Charlotte had a gift for noticing things others missed, that she picked up emotional undercurrents faster than students twice her age, and that she listened when no one thought she was listening. Right now, she was doing exactly that. Her gaze had settled on the ceremonial guardsmen posted outside the main gate, with curiosity sharpened by months of prior exposure. She'd seen this before. The red tunic, the bearskin hat, the absolute stillness in a sea of constant movement. There was something about this particular man that caught her attention. Something in the way his boots aligned perfectly with the paving stones, how the breeze caught his tunic but didn't disturb his posture, how he hadn't even blinked when a pigeon landed 3 feet away. Charlotte tilted her head slightly, not in confusion, but in assessment. Her aide leaned down and whispered softly, "The changing won't happen for another 15 minutes, Mom, but you can already tell. He's exceptionally well trained." Charlotte didn't respond, because she was watching something else now. 2 young men had drifted too close to the barrier's edge, laughing at something on one of their phones. One held it up, recording. Something in her spine stiffened just slightly. She didn't know exactly what was wrong yet, but something was, and Charlotte had always been good at noticing things just before they went sideways. Guardsman Nathan Bell had been standing for 43 minutes when the pair of men caught his peripheral attention. Not that he looked at them directly. His head remained perfectly still, chin set, eyes fixed on that precise point between 2 flagstones at the far side of the square that his training had taught him to focus on. But he'd already cataloged their presence. The erratic pacing, the phone being passed back and forth between unsteady fingers, the laughter that didn't quite match the reverent atmosphere of the setting. He noticed everything, always had. It was the one habit that had followed him out of Northern Ireland, that constant low-frequency alertness that had kept him breathing through 2 deployments. Nathan wasn't some fresh-faced recruit playing dress-up. He was 29, older than most standing ceremonial posts. Before the bare skin and red tunic, he'd worn patrol caps and desert boots, carrying his service rifle through places where people watched you, not with curiosity, but with hatred. His left leg still ached sometimes, especially when the weather changed. A patrol incident 2 years back, nothing dramatic in the reports, just a roadside stumble that went wrong, had earned him a metal plate, a year of physical therapy, and a reassignment to ceremonial duty. If anyone assumed that meant he was done being a real soldier, they were about to learn otherwise. Nathan treated his ceremonial post the same way he treated every deployment, with precision, with pride, and with the understanding that looking decorative didn't mean being defenseless. His grip on the wooden rifle never loosened. His feet stayed positioned exactly 6 inches apart, left heel aligned with the stone seam beneath him. Every 20 minutes, he would march 6 paces forward, execute a perfect pivot, and return. The rest of the time, he remained still. Not like a statue, but like a loaded weapon with the safety on. Most tourists never noticed the difference, but Nathan noticed them. His gaze never moved, but his mind worked like radar, tracking every shift in the square. The elderly woman adjusting her camera angle, the child inching toward the rope with a helium balloon, the young couple having a hushed argument near the west gate. None of them registered as threats, just movement to be catalogued. Then there were these two, in their early 20s maybe. One in a gray hoodie that had seen better decades, rocking back and forth on his heels like he was listening to music no one else could hear. The other had that particular angular build that came from too much time hunched over screens. They weren't dressed like tourists and didn't act like them either. Nathan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He didn't have the authority to act on instinct. Not yet. Ceremonial rules were carved in stone. You don't speak, you don't react, you don't even blink unless direct contact is made or the sacred boundary is breached. You hold the line until the exact moment you're told not to. Still, he'd already adjusted his breathing, slower, more controlled. They were filming him now, and experience had taught him what that usually meant. Some people saw a soldier in dress uniform and thought discipline. Others saw a target. The one in the hoodie spoke first. "Oi, mannequin," he muttered, not quite loud enough to draw security attention, but just enough to reach Nathan's ears. "Bet you're not even human under there." His friend snorted behind the phone camera, angling for a clear shot of Nathan against the pale palace stone. The red tunic stood crisp and perfect, but the man inside didn't acknowledge their existence. Not a blink, not a breath out of place. "Oh, he's good," said the one filming. "Proper statue, this one. Go on, give him a tickle, see if he laughs." A couple nearby turned slightly, curiosity catching their attention. One mother instinctively pulled her child closer. Another man shook his head in disgust and walked away entirely. But the 2 young men only grinned wider. They weren't trying to be subtle anymore. From her position behind the royal viewing screen, Princess Charlotte's eyes narrowed. She couldn't hear every word from this distance, but she didn't need to. She'd seen this kind of behavior before. Boys who either didn't know where the line was or who knew exactly where it was and simply didn't care. Her instructors had talked about it during her etiquette lessons. Her mother had mentioned it too, in those quiet conversations that happened between official duties. "Sometimes people don't respect the uniform until it pushes back," Catherine had once said. "And by then it's usually too late for apologies." Charlotte said nothing to her aide. Her back just straightened slightly, which the Royal Protection Officer to her right noticed immediately. He took a small half-step forward, closer to the barrier, but didn't speak. Protocol was clear. The princess was observing, learning. The guardsmen on duty had full authority to manage non-confrontation unless clear escalation occurred. The man with the phone moved closer, stepping near enough to the rope that his shadow fell across Nathan's polished boots. "Still nothing?" he said, tilting his head like a child inspecting a museum display. "What if I start singing? Bit of karaoke to liven things up." He launched into an off-key rendition of Rule Britannia, swaying back and forth in exaggerated time. His friend laughed so hard he nearly dropped the phone. "Look at him." Not even a twitch. Do they train you to be this boring? More tourists began drifting away now, shaking their heads and murmuring to each other. A young woman whispered something to her partner and gestured toward Charlotte's viewing area with obvious concern. That's when the man in the hoodie reached into his jacket and pulled out a crumpled chip bag, the kind coated in bright orange seasoning and grease. With a casual flick of his wrist, he lobbed it toward Nathan's feet. It hit the ancient stone with a dry rustle, landing inches from those perfectly positioned boots. Nathan didn't move, didn't even glance down at the litter now decorating the ceremonial space. But Charlotte's hands, clasped neatly in front of her, curled into small, pale fists. The second man saluted mockingly, his movements loose and theatrical. 10 hoot! The wax figures earned his chips, lads. Someone nearby muttered, "All right, that's enough now." But no one actually intervened. Nathan Bell had been insulted before. Had things thrown at him during his ceremonial duties? Had tourists tried to make him flinch for their social media content? But this felt different. There was an edge in their voices now, a building energy that suggested they believed the crowd would protect them from any real consequences. Charlotte glanced up at her aide, who leaned down and whispered, "We can relocate, Mom, if you'd prefer not to watch this continue." Charlotte didn't move. "I want to stay." She wasn't just watching the guardsmen anymore. She was watching the space around him, that invisible boundary between duty and disgrace. And it was getting thinner by the second. The laughter hadn't stopped. If anything, it had grown more confident. That brittle, brash kind of laughter that came from people convinced they couldn't be touched. Nathan stayed exactly where he was, eyes forward, shoulders square. The chip bag lay between his boots like some pathetic offering from men who thought mockery was entertainment. Then came another salute, more theatrical this time. "Permission to enter the Queen's display cabinet?" The man with the hoodie jeered, dropping into a sloppy curtsy. "Or is it king now?" Lost track with all the royal drama. His friend wheezed with laughter behind the camera. The remaining tourists weren't laughing. They weren't saying anything at all. Behind the viewing screen, Charlotte's aide tried once more. "Your Royal Highness, this really isn't your responsibility." But Charlotte's voice was calm, almost too calm. "I know it isn't." And then she moved. Not dramatically, not suddenly, just a purposeful step forward that brought her to the edge of the restricted area, separating her from the public courtyard. It was subtle, but deliberate, and eyes immediately turned toward her. The protection officer's hand twitched near his radio. The two men didn't notice her at first. They were still performing, one zooming in on Nathan's impassive face, while the other pantomimed increasingly ridiculous military poses. Then the one with the phone finally glanced up and saw her. He blinked, confused. "What's this then?" His mate followed his gaze and squinted. "Oh, it's the girl. Little Windsor herself. Come to join the fun." Charlotte took one more measured step, not crossing any barriers, not violating any protocols, but far enough that her presence became undeniable. When she spoke, her voice wasn't loud, but it carried like a stone skipping across still water. "You think it's brave to mock someone who's not allowed to respond?" The words hung in the air like they didn't belong there, because they didn't. Not from a 10-year-old. Not in a palace courtyard where silence and ceremony ruled everything. The man in the hoodie blinked again. "Sorry, what?" "He's serving," Charlotte said simply, "while you're recording a prank that quieted them, but only for a heartbeat." The one with the camera let out a nervous laugh. "What is this royal intervention? Are you going to knight him for not blinking?" Charlotte tilted her head slightly, her braid shifting against the back of her coat. "I'm just asking if you feel proud." The laughter died completely. No one moved. Even the tourists behind them had stopped their own filming. One woman slowly lowered her phone as if realizing for the first time that she'd been recording something she didn't want to be part of. Charlotte stood perfectly still. The protection officer behind her held position, knowing that unless someone crossed the barrier or made a direct threat, Protocol required his hands to stay at his sides. "You're trying to get a reaction out of someone who isn't allowed to react," Charlotte continued, her voice steady and clear. "You think that's performance? It isn't. It's restraint." The man in the hoodie opened his mouth, then closed it again. Nathan hadn't moved so much as a muscle, but everyone could feel that the balance in the square had shifted fundamentally, not because the soldier had acted, but because a child had. The silence that followed was different from what had come before. Heavier, like the ceremony itself had paused to listen. The two men hadn't expected resistance. Not from the guard's discipline, not from the crowd's disapproval, and certainly not from being called out by a 10-year-old who hadn't raised her voice, but had somehow emptied theirs. That silence should have been their warning to leave. Instead, they laughed again. But it sounded wrong now, forced, like they were trying to refill a punctured balloon. The one with the hoodie tried to recover first. "You got spunk, princess. Shame you're standing up for a cardboard cutout." His friend chimed in, less confident than before. "We were just having a bit of fun. No harm done." Charlotte didn't answer this time. Her silence was firmer than her voice had been, and somehow more final. More tourists began backing away. Parents herding children, couples exchanging glances and edging toward the gates. The atmosphere had shifted past uncomfortable into something that felt genuinely dangerous. Then the line was crossed, literally. The man in the hoodie stepped back, pulled out a half-empty bottle of lemon soda, and hurled it in a lazy arc. It slapped the stones near Guardsman Nathan Bell's boots, splashing sticky yellow liquid across the ceremonial ground. Nathan didn't flinch. Silence pressed in. Then, desperate for attention, the man vaulted the rope barrier. "I'll just adjust his hat for him then." One stride into the restricted space was all Nathan needed. He pivoted forward with controlled precision, rifle still cradled, and his shoulders slammed into the man's chest. The intruder crashed to the ground, air knocked from his lungs. Nathan instantly turned, body between Princess Charlotte and the downed man. The heckler's friend froze, then bolted, only to skid to a halt as Nathan stepped into his path, rifle lowered just enough to block. The man's nerve broke. Sirens wailed. Security officers sprinted across the courtyard, urging the crowd back. Parents lifted children. Phones were raised, not to provoke, but to record. Nathan pressed a boot near the first man's wrist, holding him in place without striking. The second raised his hands in surrender. Princess Charlotte stood still, calm, watching. Her security officer touched her shoulder, but she didn't retreat. She simply looked at Nathan with what might have been pride or recognition. Armed officers rushed in. Both men were restrained against the wall, one wheezing, the other muttering about free speech. No one listened. Nathan stood several paces away, rifle back in place, posture flawless. A Royal Protection Commander arrived. "Name? Guardsman Nathan Bell, sir." "Report." Two civilians breached the ceremonial boundary toward a member of the royal family. One made a threatening movement. I neutralized the threat with minimal force. The commander's face hardened. "Which family member?" "Her Royal Highness, Princess Charlotte of Wales." The words shifted everything. The crowd realized who had been standing behind the ropes. Phones lowered, whispers turned reverent. The detained men protested, "We didn't know," but an officer silenced them. "No one's asking if you knew, only what you did." The commander ordered Nathan back to post. He complied, rifle across his chest, composure restored. Charlotte stepped to the barrier, voice clear in the hush. "Thank you for your duty." Nathan couldn't reply, bound by protocol, but he shifted his stance. Just enough that only she would notice. It was enough. Back at Kensington Palace, Catherine listened quietly as Charlotte recounted the event. "You shouldn't have spoken without clearance," she said at last. Then, softer, "But you spoke well. You made them reconsider without shouting. You reminded them of respect." Charlotte nodded. "I didn't like how they treated him." Neither did I, Catherine admitted. Your grandfather wants to speak with you. He isn't angry. He's curious. The next morning at Wellington Barracks, Nathan stood before Captain Holay. You left formation, engaged civilians, broke protocol, Holay said, closing the file. Any regrets? No, sir. Holay slid an envelope across the desk. Good. Because this isn't punishment. Palace security requested you by name. You're reassigned to ceremonial support, with availability for Princess Charlotte's protection. Apparently, she remembers everything. Nathan accepted the order without expression, but the weight of it was clear. Days later, the changing of the guard proceeded as usual. Boots striking stone, brass music echoing across the courtyard. But something was different. Tourists watched with deeper respect. Near the barrier, a boy whispered to his teacher, "Is that the one who protected the princess?" The teacher nodded. The boy straightened proudly. Behind the ropes, Charlotte stood quietly in her navy coat, her gaze following Nathan as he passed. She didn't wave or speak. He didn't look back. Yet something in his bearing shifted, the tiniest acknowledgement, mirrored by her calm presence. The crowd applauded at the end of the march, not wildly, but with sustained respect. A boy saluted. Nathan didn't respond, but paused for the briefest heartbeat before resuming his stride. Everyone who noticed understood. Between ceremony and courage, tradition and truth, Princess Charlotte had found her voice. Nathan had proven that discipline wasn't weakness, but strength in its purest form. And together, without planning it, they reminded the world that respect and duty never go out of style. They only need someone willing to stand up when it matters most. Have you ever seen someone step forward when no one else would? What would you have done if you saw a guard mocked in public? Should Charlotte have spoken or stayed silent? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If this story showed you what real courage looks like, tap like, subscribe, and ring the bell. Share this with someone who still thinks guards are just decoration. Your next story is waiting right here. Click it and remember, real strength doesn't announce itself. It simply steps forward when stepping forward is needed.